Hey, everybody. It is Friday night, April 25th, about 8 p.m., give or take, when I'm recording this. I'm Hawk. Welcome back to my page. If you like this video, please click like, leave a comment, subscribe to my page. It's free, yada, yada, yada. I found an article yesterday that I wanted to talk about that adds a whole new wrinkle to some of the, about half, roughly, of the immigrants who were kidnapped by the United States and sent to CECOT prison in El Salvador. It adds a whole new legal layer to things that is wildly unprecedented, and absolutely nobody understands what this is going to mean. Because up until I read this article, and based on the representations of the Trump administration, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act, and then sent 3 plane loads of Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador to be housed in this prison. Trump and his supporters have said these were the most violent of the violent criminals anywhere on the planet, and that they were all sent there under the Alien Enemies Act, which seems to kind of put all of them in the same box. And I think that clearly is what the courts understood as they've been issuing their rulings over the last month, culminating with the Supreme Court saying that even if you're deported under the Alien Enemies Act, you have a right to notice, a reasonable amount of time for notice. You have a right to due process. You have a right to a hearing. And, well, it turns out, and plus it's like, okay, so I saw a report on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago, and CBS News had obtained a list of names of the young men who were on these 3 flights. And based on CBS's investigation, 75% of the men on these planes had no charges and no criminal records either in the United States or El Salvador, and they were being sent to this prison for life. About 12 to 15% of them had minor charges for misdemeanors, burglary, things like that, non-violent offenses. And then there were 5 to 8% that had been charged with or had records of violent crimes like rape and murder. And so it turns out that when the Trump administration sent more than 200 Venezuelans to an El Salvador detention camp last month, I think that was on March 15th, nearly half of them were subject to standard immigration law, meaning that they were not deported based on or pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act. And Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act because he said the United States was being subject to an invasion from forces that were being directed by the Venezuelan government, which is what that law requires. We either have to be in a state of war, which only Congress can declare war, or we have to be experiencing an invasion being directed by a foreign government, usually a foreign military that's being directed by the government. And Donald Trump's own national security agencies and intelligence agencies found that there was absolutely no evidence that President Maduro, the Venezuelan government, was in any way directing members of this Venezuelan street gang, Tren de Aragua. And Donald Trump has basically represented that every single young man on these 3 planes was a member of Tren de Aragua. Well, it turns out that at least 100 of them were not deported subject to the Alien Enemies Act. They were deported subject to normal everyday immigration law. And that's what they've stated that's what the government has stated in recent court documents. While the administration invoked the Alien Enemies Act to dubiously justify sending 137 detainees to El Salvador, more than 100 others that day had received standard, lawful deportation orders, often to Venezuela from immigration courts. So they were being deported legally, but none of them had any idea they were being sent to El Salvador or to a prison in El Salvador. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But the importance of these 100 young men being deported pursuant to regular lawful deportation orders is because the I keep calling the Trump administration the Trump organization. Freudian slip, yeah. The Trump administration has said repeatedly that everybody on these planes was members of Tren de Aragua, a violent Venezuelan street gang, and they were being deported pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act. And almost half of them were not being deported pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act, which means there have been no allegations in court made that those 100 men were at any point in time members of Tren de Aragua, the violent Venezuelan street gang. So stick with me for a minute on this. In these cases, these 100 men, the administration invoked standard immigration authority to hold Venezuelans indefinitely in CECOT, a Salvadoran prison, notorious for allegations of forced labor and torture. The move, done under a bilateral agreement with El Salvador, has left these detainees completely incommunicado and held without charge or conviction, no trial, no sentence, and their families and attorneys have had no contact with them since March 15th, can't get in contact with any of them, and they're just left here fighting for the release of these young men. It's just unbelievable. The case presents, I'm not sure I said earlier, I'm reading an article from Talking Points Memo. Everybody should subscribe to Talking Points Memo. This is written by one of their many excellent reporters, Josh Kovensky. The cases present a Kafkaesque situation. The government did not remove these Venezuelans under the Wartime Alien Enemies Act, which the administration argued is what allows it to send these people to this prison in El Salvador without due process, an argument the Supreme Court later rejected. Rather, the administration has contended in court filings that these individuals were sent to El Salvador under the INA, the Immigration and Nationality Act. That is in some tension with the result. They were sent to a prison that is neither in the U.S. nor their country of origin, Venezuela, with no charges in either country, no convictions, no sentences in either country, and no clear legal authority justifying their continued indefinite detention. The U.S. government is simply paying El Salvador to hold them. So it's nothing more than a transaction. If the U.S. government stops paying El Salvador, is El Salvador going to keep housing these men? The result, relatives and advocates for those detained told Talking Points Memo, is indefinite confinement in a foreign country for people accused of being undocumented immigrants, raising due process questions separate and apart from those that persist regarding the other 137 men who were removed under the Alien Enemies Act. The question at the core of this is, are these detainees in the custody of the United States or El Salvador? That question now features in at least 2 habeas corpus lawsuits filed on behalf of 2 of the men removed. This is a question that the federal courts are going to have to resolve, said an immigration professor from Ohio State University. We are in unprecedented territory here. In one of the cases, national immigration nonprofits representing a detainee accused the government of unlawful detention under color of law, among other claims. Josh Kovensky in Talking Points Memo identified a second previously unreported lawsuit brought by the wife of an undocumented Venezuelan-born New York City man. His wife, Gloria Browning Vamondes Barrios, filed a pro se lawsuit, meaning she couldn't find an attorney. She wrote a lawsuit herself, and she's representing herself in federal court in Brooklyn on behalf of her husband, Miguel, who was removed to El Salvador on March 15th. Ms. Barrios knew something had gone wrong when she saw on the news that the Trump administration had sent 3 flights of deportees to El Salvador in defiance of a judge's order given earlier that day. She spent days speaking with her husband, Miguel Barrios, tracking him as the government moved him from Pennsylvania to El Paso, Texas, to Webb County Detention Facility in Laredo, Texas. She spoke with him from her home in Brooklyn, New York, hours before he was removed on March 15th. He told me he was going to call me when he landed in Venezuela. He was a couple hours from being removed from the United States on a plane, and nobody had yet told him that he was going to El Salvador or that he was going to this prison and that he was potentially going to spend the rest of his life in this prison with no criminal charge in either country, no conviction in either country, no trial, no sentence, no nothing. The next day she saw the news. I waited for him to call me. And then I see the news that Venezuelans landed in El Salvador, and I just knew it was him. Ms. Barrios has not heard from her husband since. His name appeared on a list of Venezuelans sent to the CECOT prison, published by CBS News a few days after the removals on March 15th. Mr. Barrios was one of those deportees removed through what the Trump administration contends were normal immigration processes not done under the Alien Enemies Act. Per a copy of a deportation order reviewed by Talking Points memo, an immigration judge ordered Mr. Barrios removed to Venezuela in December 2024. That's the date of that order. He was ordered to be removed to Venezuela. So this potentially violates a third court order, because they didn't remove him to Venezuela. They removed him to El Salvador and put him in one of the worst prisons in the Western Hemisphere. Mr. Barrios had entered the United States in 2021. He had a few minor run-ins with the law, but never any. It doesn't look like he ever had any convictions on anything. In some ways, he exemplifies how this administration's plan to indefinitely confine people in a Salvadoran prison flattens the complexity of each case. Listen to this next sentence. Mr. Barrios had agreed to be removed to Venezuela per court documents reviewed by Talking Points memo, and had agreed to withdraw a pending asylum claim that he had made in the United States. He agreed to be deported to Venezuela, and he agreed to withdraw an asylum claim in the United States. The judge ordered that he be removed and deported to Venezuela, and instead the Trump administration sent him to El Salvador and put him in this prison, potentially for the rest of his life. Because the government sent him to CECOT, there remains an open question about whose custody he is in and who can sue or who can secure his release. His wife has sought legal counsel, but is proceeding pro se in a habeas lawsuit she brought in federal court on March 31st. I'm guessing after this article was published that she's been able to find some pro bono immigration counsel. At least I hope she has been. This is similar to another lawsuit brought on behalf of another Venezuelan CECOT detainee whose last name is Chacon. In that case, relatives of Mr. Chacon initially filed a pro se lawsuit in the Middle District of Georgia. Then attorneys with the American Immigration Council and Center for Constitutional Rights joined and filed a new complaint accusing the Trump administration of violating Mr. Chacon's habeas corpus rights by detaining him without charge or conviction in El Salvador and for unlawfully detaining him under color of law. None of these fucking guys had criminal charges, man, or convictions. Unbelievable. And Donald Trump wants to pay El Salvador $6 million to put them in the worst prison in the Western Hemisphere for the rest of their lives. What this case really hinges on is the notion that even though he's physically in El Salvador, the United States government is controlling that custody, said one of the attorneys. The government is controlling that custody. That's the key word, control. They've signed a contract with the Salvadoran government to detain people there. So what we're arguing in this case is that the government is still the de facto custodian of Mr. Chacon and all of the other people there, because it's a transaction for payment. And like I said before, if Trump administration stops paying, is the Salvadoran government going to continue to house these guys, or are they just going to release them, or are they all going to put them all on a plane back to the United States? Whose custody? So here's an interesting kind of analogy. The last time the courts had to explore similar questions around habeas corpus came in the years following 9/11. The Bush administration had launched a global war on terror, saying that it would leverage diplomatic relationships and the vast reach of the country's military and intelligence apparatuses to pursue Islamic extremists around the world. In practice, it meant a lot of overreach, errors, and in some cases, boundary pushing, legally dubious efforts to keep targets out of the reach of American courts and legal protections. Also, torture. You know, we all remember the torture memo and taking these guys to black sites outside of the U.S. jurisdiction and waterboarding the shit out of them to get confessions that could then never be used against them in court because they were obtained through torture. One case from that era ended up, if only briefly, testing the same legal principle at stake in the El Salvador habeas removals. In 2003, a U.S. citizen named Ahmed Abu Ali was arrested in Saudi Arabia and held there without charge, a U.S. citizen. During his detention, FBI officials purportedly watched as he was interrogated by Saudi officials. Yeah. Abu Ali's parents filed a habeas corpus lawsuit in Washington, D.C., saying that the U.S. was using the Saudi government as an intermediary to detain their son. A district court agreed, finding that he had jurisdiction to determine if the habeas claim was true. Beyond that, experts TPM spoke with said that the issue remains mostly academic because this specific situation has never been addressed before, because no fucking president of the United States has ever signed a contract with a third world dictator to allow the president of the United States to imprison people in a foreign prison. This is almost worse than the other 137 guys who were taken out under the Alien Enemies Act, because at least the Trump administration has accused them of being gang members and using the Alien Enemies Act to deport them in a time of war. And the court has said, even if you use the Alien Enemies Act, they're still entitled to due process. These 100 men all got due process already. They had immigration hearings. They were subject to lawful withdrawal orders, lawful removal orders that came either from immigration judges or from administrative judges in the immigration department. These guys all had due process. And it sounds like every single one of them believed that they were being deported to Venezuela pursuant to a court order saying deport them to Venezuela. And at the last minute, without telling them ahead of time, the Trump organization put them on these 3 planes and sent them to El Salvador and put them in this prison potentially for the rest of their lives with no additional due process, and no due process before they got on that plane. No notice telling them where they were going, where they were going to end up, and whether or not they could fight it and how they could fight it if they had that right. It's lawless, racist thuggery is what this administration has become. Lawless, racist thuggery. Jesus. Anyway, again, if you enjoyed this video, because really, I mean, when you're talking about third world prisons that are known for, torture and death camps, what's more entertaining than that? Sorry. Please click like, please click a comment, please subscribe to my page. It's free. And if more people subscribe to my page, then I don't have to be a lawyer anymore. And I don't want to do that anymore. I want to just live in a cabin in the woods. away from people. So that's the goal. Anyway, it's Friday night. And of course, it's a quarter after 8 on Friday night. So of course I'm hanging out here at my apartment with my brother and his dog because that's what I do on Friday nights now, which is amazing. I love my brother. I love his dog. He's an amazing person. I'm very lucky to have him as my sibling. But everybody, please have a fun and safe weekend. And if you're protesting this weekend, please be safe. Please do not give the police any excuse to arrest you. And have a great weekend, anybody, everybody, or anybody. Anybody who sees this, have a great weekend. And I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Thank you for watching.